G'day folks, Mark here again. I want to do the next one, or maybe it's an interlude one, in the way of the 4AW Precision Long Range Shooting School. Before I get into some of the really fundamental basic steps of what I think people should learn in this process, which is going to be teaching a lot of people how to suck eggs, because a lot of people already know this sort of stuff, I want to sort of jump a few steps forward with this video and go into the people who either do know, have known, or have skipped there, taught themselves, that sort of stuff. They're shooting, they're using their rifle, they're doing these bits and pieces, but they have some issues. Their rifle sucks, or they suck in places that they don't understand why, and it actually is in the fundamentals, but things that you should be looking for, things that are most commonly likely to cause a rifle or a shooter to do the wrong thing, which are not obvious if you're in that place and are trying to find it. Loading ammo differently or buying another component or getting a new rifle isn't necessarily the problem that you're dealing with. And I suppose I want to go through some basics of what it could be. Also, when I go through this stuff, in this video here, I'm going to link a whole heap of info videos below. So there's a whole list. If you go in the details below, you should be able to find something of what you're trying to deal with. Whether it's muzzle brakes, or it's scope mounting, or it's muzzle jump, or it's bipods, or it's shooting form, or whatever it is, the ballistics and all sorts of stuff, how bullets work, hollow point bullets, monolithic bullets, all that sort of stuff. There's a list of stuff down there of videos. Some are a little bit long and windy, and I'll try and refine them as things go. But if you're looking for that information and a specific answer to things, look down below. You may well be able to find what you're looking for. So, other than that, in the fashion of, you've got a rifle, you've been shooting it away, and there's an issue you're trying to fix. What's the most likely thing that's wrong? Now, in the basics, we will start from shooting form. Shooting form is a big deal. There's a lot of people who will naturally find a shooting form that works. In most cases, when they naturally find it, it works sometimes and not all the time. And normally, it will be copying something they've seen one before. They've seen an F-class shooter do it this way, or they've seen the military do it this way, or they've seen whatever it is. They've seen someone do it this way, so they're doing what they're doing, and they've made it work for them. Doesn't always work. A shooting form involves you, the person. It involves the area you shoot, whether you're shooting on a bench, or you're shooting offhand, or you're shooting prone, or you're shooting in whatever form it is. There's a form that does suit that, but it's also the rifle. If you are shooting a free form side of things, where you are in whether it's bench shooting or it's prone shooting, and whether you're going in the classic prone immediately behind the rifle, or you've got your legs spread out wide because you're more military, or you've got out to one side because you've seen the F-class dudes and some of the ELR shooters do that sort of stuff, but you're shooting with a normal lightweight rifle compared to the heavyweight rifles you're looking at, because you've got a normal rifle and you just bought one off the shelf, or got an old one out of the cupboard, and you're shooting with this. So we're talking something between 10 pounds and 20 pounds a rifle, and it depends on what the caliber is and how it's set up. But that sort of rifle you're shooting, where you're trying to do this almost no contact, where you get your hand very gentle on it, you're trying to shoot it with the logic of the shooter messes up the shot, so I'll let the rifle do itself. Now, in the nature, that can work sometimes, it really can, but generally in an average rifle, it's actually designed for the shooter being connected with it. And it is quite different from a big F-class rifle, or something that's set up on either a skid bipod with a lot of weight, heavy barrel, and the thing will go straight backwards, and they still have the shooter behind it, but it pushes into them. It's very different from shooting a rifle that is more set up to be carried around, more set up to be shot, whether it's offhand or it's off bipod, or if it's hot sticks or whatever, but it's made to be contacted. And the main clue you'll know that this is, well, two things. One, if you're shooting perfectly, fine, leave it alone. That's just fine. Regardless of what everyone says, if you keep on shooting actual under half MOA groups, then it's working fine for you. As long as it really is that. It's not just one and then one 3-shot group and then the rest all over the place. No, that isn't shooting a half MOA group grouping rifle, that's just one group you got. You can get that by chance as well. So if you don't have any issues, fine. But if you do, one of the clues is actually how much you can, what you're going to do after you've shot the rifle. If you've got to then go and find the target again because it's moved off, or it's bucked up in the air, or you're worried about getting scope bit where the scope comes back and hits you in the brow, or there's anything where there's a lot of essentially loss of control of the rifle during that instant it's shooting, then that means your form could do with improving. Whether that's gripping the rifle a little bit more, whether it's pulling into you, whether it's preloading on the bipod, whether it's putting something down for the bipod to push against so you can push it into that area with moderate pressure, whatever it is. It's certainly, if you are at the place where you're putting your hand forward on your scope or on the front of the barrel to hold it down when you shoot it, that's a bad form. Something's set up wrong. Even if that works well, it will never work consistently because you're doing something weird with the rifle. So if you find that when you shoot and it jumps a long way, it goes over here, it's pretty accurate, but I don't know what's actually going on. No, your form isn't suiting what you're shooting in the way of a rifle. So I have various form ones. I have a main form one I've done on prone shooting. I have the way we do it, which is chest off the ground, which is a particular way of shooting, but it's about comfort. And that's another thing which I'd say, if you are in a place where you shoot, but you can only do it 2 or 3 rounds and you're sore, adjust your form. It doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't matter that the gunnery sergeant said, no, you must do it like this. It doesn't matter what they said there. What matters, if you're going to do this consistently, you need to be able to find a way to do it comfortably. And yes, you can. Even a 63-year-old man can lay down the ground and figure out how to do this with all sorts of sore bits in the body, still make all this happen. So form's a key place to start. Another thing that really matters into that, I mentioned about bounce and the rifle bouncing. So even with the right form, if you're in the wrong situation, whether it's shooting from a bench or shooting from in a prone position where you have what you're sitting your bipod on, or even your rest on, or even just your rifle on, if it's a bouncy, squishy thing moving all over the place, then that's unlikely to work well. Now, I know it's shooting on a bag or shooting on a rucksack or something like that, with the right sort of contact to your body, you can sort of manage that, and you still have to be aware of it. If you've got it sitting on where it's a really springy bit of the bag, it's a lot better to tuck it up, or the rucksack. It's a lot better to put it to where it's a firmer place. It doesn't need to be hard, like on metal or on wood rubbing, but you want something so it's not damaging anything. But if it doesn't move, that has more connected to it. Coming back to what I'm really talking about, and that's shooting on, you see people set up on a card table or on some rickety old thing on there and do the bench shooting. They can get to where they can hold it dead still for the shot, they pull the shot for the aiming, they pull the shot, and then it bounces around. The same thing can happen for a shooting mat. You've got one of these shooting mats, it's a nice comfy mat, it's nice and squishy, so you lay down and it helps your elbows, it helps your hips or your knees or whatever it is, so it's nicer to lay on. Which is, okay, all wonderful. I tend to recommend getting closer to the ground rather than anything even under the body. But particularly if you've got your bipod feet sitting on something that's all squishy and bouncy, it's not inclined to produce a good group. So if you have got a mat like that, you do need that because you're laying on rocks or whatever it is, get your bipod off the mat onto the ground. So let those bipod feet bite into the ground. Something that they can preload against is nice, but largely getting it onto something that is more sturdy. And it's even if your bipod feet or bipod legs are really springy. The rest of it, the whole logic of resting your rifle and being still while you're pulling the trigger is only relevant if it stays moderately still through that process. If it boings around the place, when it goes bang, the bullet has not left the barrel the moment that trigger breaks. It has to get out of the barrel. So if the rifle starts moving in that time, that's a larger group. Always remember that. This also comes into another really important piece, and that is follow through, or trigger control, but follow through. The actual keeping your finger there. So the same thing that happens for a springy platform, that can open up a group, because even though you've got it still when you're holding on target, when it goes click, when it goes bang, there is milliseconds involved in getting there, and if movement starts, well, that changes where the bullet ends up, where the impact is. Same thing happens for your finger. Follow through. Now, what we're talking about there, and I suppose it moves into a few bits and pieces. Flinching, too much tension in your muscles, all that sort of stuff. You should have somewhere or other, whether it's dry firing a rifle, whether you've got a toy handgun you can play with. I have one of those around here. A nice simple toy handgun that I can play with. Something that you can learn how to, yeah, it's a toy handgun pointing at you, but you can learn how to pull the trigger without anything going wrong. This has got a nice 8-9 pound trigger. It forces you to actually get control. It forces you to do the exercising of learning how to move your finger without moving the rest of your body. But even more so than that, even though that's really important, the actual holding your trigger, holding your finger on the trigger after you've fired is what's important. I used to say, wait until you've seen what's actually happened, then lift your finger off the trigger. There's a lot of people trained at ranges or being properly safe, where they're banging. The first thing they're trying to do is get their finger out of the trigger guard and into safe mode. It's a good safe trigger. That good safe trigger, if you're doing this instant push forward, get your finger out of there when you are just broken the trigger, you're almost certainly causing a point of impact movement, because that's one of the things, it's follow through. A really good place to practice that is with 22, particularly 22 with slow ammo. You don't have good trigger control, you will find that you get this large group and nothing else seems to be wrong. You're aiming dead straight, but you keep on shooting all over the place. You blame the ammo, blame the rifle, blame that sort of stuff. Follow through is a key ingredient. Because the bullet is so slow, it takes so long to get out of the barrel, your finger moving around afterwards, and not just your finger, any part of you moving around afterwards, breathing out, whatever it is, if it happens the instant it goes bang, then that's something that causes a group to suck. So keeping that finger there, keeping it in, and then make the mental note to take it out. Don't go flinching around. No, it stays there, stays with the finger back against the broken trigger, back against that hard wall there, and then you let it fall. Then you let it fall off. So I used to say wait until it was impacted. When you've got a 6 second, 8 second, 13 second shot, hey, you can get to the point of you've been there for a second and a half type thing. You let it all out. There's nothing wrong with that sort of stuff. But it is done by dry fire practice and a mental note. And I suppose it comes into that one. There's a very important one to understand out of removing any form of flinch. So if you have a extra loud firearm and not the greatest hearing protection, if you have no muzzle brake and the rifle really pushes you back really heavy, if you have a hard butt pad, these things, even without all the other engineering in the rifle, which we've sort of touched on and I'll go through again, you have anything that's causing you to physically react to the shot in any aggressive sense, that is something that will generally make a worse group. You generally start to tense up, you start to react, you start to flinch, whatever. You pull through, you can't just squeeze that trigger, you start to yank it through. That'll mess things up. It's certainly a real key ingredient for beginning shooters and for introducing someone to shooting. If you have something that has a bit of this ego game, oh, shoot this, it's just awesome, it's really big, it's a big bang because you're a big man and you can shoot this big firearm. Listen, it generally is not a good thing to do. Even if it's yourself, you'll find that some people will pick up a larger firearm, they go through and do this, whether it's a handgun, I said pick up, but use one, and it'll actually take them a while after shooting it to get rid of the flinch in other firearms. So it's something to be wary of. You certainly don't want something to react that way. Stopping the flinch, but also stopping the tension that leads up to a flinch is very relevant for good shooting. And I suppose then it gets back into the two other key ingredients, or probably three other key ingredients. One would be scope mounting, and that attaches all to rifle maintenance. Making sure that the rings, the rail, the base, the everything is tensioned properly, locked up and not loose. So making sure it stays nice and tight. The same thing for the rifle, action screws, that sort of stuff. Cleanliness matters. I tend to run an equilibrium thing, but you know, if you clean your barrels all the time, for sure, it's a process of its own. I've found it not necessary for what we do, but I'd also say rifle maintenance, we are probably a little peculiar through the fact that I'm always bolting a rifle together and pulling it apart to put it away, and that's what we do. So that's where we seem to have lots of rifles. We have lots of barrels and a few actions and some chassis, and I bolt them together differently. So they're always just assembled and they're always unassembled not long afterwards. That also means that my maintenance is very high. They're always tensioned correctly. There's no bolts working loose and that sort of things. One of the things I've certainly seen in times gone by where a rifle that was always together, always used it, go out and shoot. What's wrong with it? Really not uncommon to find, particularly with cheaper rails and cheaper bases, cheaper rings, is that you can end up with a tiny bit of movement in things. And it doesn't take much movement. 1 thou of movement of access so 1 thou is 1 inch at 100 yards. So you only need a few thou of movement and you can have a 5-inch group out there because something in your scope mechanism is loose. But this also affects if your rails, if your bolt to your chassis or your bolt to your stock are loose or moving or changing in tension, it changes how the dynamics of the rifle work, it changes how some of the harmonics work, and you can end up with that same sort of thing, a 4 or 5-inch group, simply through a lack of maintenance, lack of checking things over. So really relevant on that score. And then the last, and in some cases the first most important thing, is parallax. Scope parallax. Few videos down there to properly go through and see how to set it up, but it does matter. Scope parallax simply means that unless you've got it set up properly, unless you know how to use it properly, what you think you're aiming at could be 6 inches away from what you're actually aiming at. So the crosshair essentially starts to move around in relevance to where your eye is, so it's not pointing in the exact same place. Might sound a bit fantastic. There's videos down there to explain it a lot better than that, but understanding it and having it properly set up means that then it's always aiming where you're aiming. And that in itself, if you are actually aiming 2 inches off to the side of where you think you're aiming, well, then you're probably going to hit 2 inches off to the side of where you think you're aiming. So you do that in a varying thing, you can end up with a 5-inch group simply because you haven't set your parallax up properly. So that, in some cases, with everything else good, that's always something to check. And that's always something to check. You'll notice me check it whenever I go into a target. I make sure I move my eye around. Like I said, videos down there to explain, but always check it and don't trust it. Even shot to shot, some scopes will mess it up. So it's something to understand. So that's probably it. There's form bounce, there's your mat and your springy benches or your springy mats, there's trigger control, there's follow through, there's flinch, understanding flinch and whether it's better hearing protection or it's a better butt pad or it's a better muzzle brake. And not all these things just simply fix stuff, but they may be the issue. The dry firing, super important for that trigger control. The not letting your finger off too early, so follow through, make sure it stays there. There's a straight pull on your trigger, all that sort of stuff I get into in trigger form and things like that. But the basics of getting that right and dry firing in some form or other and watching to see how much of a movement you get as you try and pull that trigger, really relevant. Obviously trigger pressures and things like that change that as well. Scope mounting, rifle maintenance, and parallax. All really, really important things. There's no doubt some more. Put some notes down below. There's lots of bits and pieces you can go through. Trying to keep these videos a little bit shorter. But like I said, if you're looking for specific information, well, you said that about muzzle brakes. What about muzzle brakes? I've got lots of videos on muzzle brakes down there. Bipods, same sort of thing. Lots of videos explaining it, how to use them, how they work, different ones to different places. Yeah, there's a fair bit of information and we've got more to come. Anyway, guys, hope you liked the video. Thanks very much for checking in. I'll catch you next time.